Welcome everyone to our very first MS Innovation program. Today we're going to be talking about fatigue management in multiple sclerosis. So first I'd like to welcome all of you. My name is Dr. Sarah Morrow. I'm the director of the MS program. Just joined Calgary since October of 2023. So still new to the program and still new to the city and getting used to it, but it's been great being here so far. And it's nice to be able to highlight one of the great parts of our program that Liz and Megan are going to present today. So before we get started though, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are here in Calgary on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which is located in the heart of Southern Alberta. And this includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, which comprises the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Good Stoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta's District 5 and 6. So the Calgary MS program is really geared towards combining both clinical care and research. So on our clinical side, we have one clinic at two locations at both FMC and SHC. So the idea is that we are one clinic together, but we're able to see patients at two locations so that we can serve people who live in different parts of the city and of course the catchment area outside of Calgary as well. We have 11 neurologists in total as well as one nurse practitioner. We have two neuropsychiatrists and one physiatrist that work across both sites. In addition to that, we have four nurses at each location as well as several administration staff who do things such as booking the appointments, ensuring your MRIs are booked, doing that paperwork that's required to get your medications covered. So it's really quite a large team that's working with you in the clinic. And then, of course, we also have our team of allied health who specialize in MS and other neurological disorders. At the FMC program, which Liz is going to talk about today, there is the Optimus program, which is a unique program here in Calgary. And then the other part of our program is our research side. So I am the co-director of the HBI research program along with Dr. Wee Young, who's pictured here. We have 25 researchers associated with our HBI program, and our big focus is on that translational research. So what we call bench to bedside to bench. So taking ideas out of the lab and seeing how that can apply to people actually living with MS. Or sometimes the opposite, where you can see something in MS, someone living with MS, and wonder what is the cause or how is that affecting things, and take that back to the lab to look at it from the basic science point of view. So really working in that kind of translational research rather than being siloed in one type of research. We have many areas of research that we focus on. I've just highlighted a few here: MRI research, biomarkers, things that will tell us how MS is acting or when it's starting, clinical trials, so actually testing medications, myelin repair, which is of course a really hot topic in the area of MS. And then finally, the one that's near and dearest to my heart is cognition and symptom management, which we're going to talk about a bit more today. So it's with my great pleasure that I introduce our two speakers today. Both Megan Parker and Liz Benfield will be talking about our fatigue program. So first, Megan graduated from the University of Alberta with a Master's of Science in Occupational Therapy. She initially started working in the stroke program in Edmonton and then the Community Accessible Rehabilitation Program in Calgary before she came to the MS outpatient clinic at SHC, which opened in 2012, and she joined us at that time. She has her MS Certified Specialist designation. Outside of her life as an OT, she's a professional artist, painting modern mountain landscapes, and stays busy with numerous outdoors activities such as skiing and hiking and camping, as well as keeping up with her twin sons and her husband. Liz is also an OT. She also graduated from the University of Alberta. She's been working in OT in acute care, leadership, and long-term care, as well as mental health, before starting with the Optimus program at FMC in 2014. Outside of work, she also stays quite active with skiing, mountain biking, as well as Highland dancing, as well as keeping busy with her two children. So welcome, Megan and Liz, and I'm going to pass it over to them now.
Hi everyone, Liz here. So excited to be talking to the group here today about navigating the fatigue management supports and different initiatives through the Calgary MS program. So we're going to kind of take you through just some information about fatigue to start with. So just some kind of common observations and different thoughts around MS fatigue. So we know that MS fatigue is not only difficult to define, but it's also one of those invisible symptoms. So in other words, it's hard for others to see it. This can really make it difficult to understand or explain it to others. MS fatigue is more than just the tiredness that everyone can feel after, say, having a busy day, maybe overexerting themselves, or missing a good night's sleep. MS fatigue can be physical and mental. It saps the energy almost instantaneously sometimes, and it can really ultimately stop you from doing and completing some of your regular everyday activities. MS fatigue can be very debilitating, and unlike ordinary fatigue, it can take a long time to recover from that fatigue. So just some other observations about MS fatigue. Typically, we do hear people describing that it does worsen as the day progresses. So oftentimes mornings might be a little bit better, and then by afternoon, say that 2 o'clock range, the fatigue levels are really noticeable and starting to really slow you down. It can appear more easily and suddenly than ordinary fatigue. It's generally more severe than ordinary fatigue. It can be actually made worse by heat and humidity, and it's really ultimately more likely to interfere with your daily activities than, say, regular ordinary fatigue would be. While the jury is still out and research is still trying to pinpoint exactly what's causing MS fatigue, some of the theories, right, that we do believe is that there's kind of different two types of MS fatigue. There's the primary fatigue, which is directly related to the disease process itself, so those lesions and damage to that central nervous system or your brain and spinal cord. And then there's also the secondary fatigue, which are not MS specific, but certainly can be related. And oftentimes, some of these symptoms, like depression, can be symptoms of MS, but also can contribute to worsening or more severe levels of fatigue. So, for instance, MS symptoms like depression or pain or sleep disturbances can really all contribute to a worsening level of fatigue, but those problems are not thought to be caused by MS itself always. Just to talk a little bit more about primary fatigue, we know that primary MS fatigue is likely due to changes in the brain and damage to the central nervous system. Um, in multiple sclerosis, your immune system is mistakenly attacking those myelin cells, which on the right-hand side here, you can see that there's sort of those little nice coverings that are usually on the nerve cell are kind of eaten away and destroyed a little bit. And what's happening is when that damage has occurred, it actually affects how the messages are able to be sent from one part of your brain to another, or from your brain down to your arm, for example. And as a result, your body's actually having to work quite a bit harder to get the signals across. And when you think about the span of a day, all those little movements and thoughts and things that you have to do with your body spending a lot more energy on sending those signals down, it's thought that that's one of the reasons as to why the MS fatigue kind of builds up, and can become a lot more impactful in your daily activities. So your body's just working so hard to get those messages through. Looking deeper into primary fatigue, when the fatigue is a direct result from the damage to the brain and spinal cord, or damage to that central nervous system, that's what we label primary fatigue. And we can talk about it in kind of four different main areas. The first being lassitude, and I feel like this is maybe an older term, but anyway, I do see it pop up every now and then. Lassitude is sort of a way to describe that overwhelming sense of tiredness that is not directly related to kind of any participation in any activities or exercise. There's also what we call neuromuscular, motor, or short-circuiting fatigue. And this can occur in sort of specific muscle groups. So let's say you've been typing for a while, or I don't know, you're going up and down the stairs and using your legs lots. And what can happen is that you can feel some of that physical weakness. And what we do find, and what is promising, is that kind of fatigue does actually respond really well to rest, which is why you're going to be hearing Megan and I talk about a lot of the rest and pacing strategies coming up. There's also heat sensitivity fatigue, and this is basically, when a rise in body temperature occurs, whether it's from an infection or a hot bath or a hot day, the rate of your nerve conduction can slow down and can actually contribute to fatigue. And then there's the cognitive fatigue, which we'll often heard described as kind of brain fog. It's when your cognitive skills, like your thinking, your memory, your learning, your attention, are affected by fatigue. and that is more common than you'd think, and we're going to go into that a little bit in a second here. So MS, fatigue, and heat. About 60 to 80% of people with MS will find that an increase in body temperature can actually contribute to worsening fatigue levels or higher fatigue levels. And what can happen is, they might be reporting sort of an increase in symptoms like maybe blurry vision, maybe some of that weakness, maybe some numbness in your extremities or slowed reaction times, maybe tremor, and of course fatigue and sometimes cognitive challenges as well. What the thought is that as your body warms up, again, that nerve conduction will slow down, requires your brain's spinal cord to work harder, can contribute again to fatigue. Ultimately, if you're working harder, more energy is being spent to complete, any daily activity. One thing that we want to highlight here is that that rise in body temperature doesn't have to be huge. I mean, I've read somewhere in the range of 0.1 of a degree, so not a significant rise. And it is important to remember that you're not actually doing any permanent neurological damage by getting overheated. So it's okay, it's safe to do it. We just have to make sure that you recover to some degree. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what are some of the cooling strategies. How do you stay cool? I mean, I think that there's a wide range of things that work for people, and ultimately, anything that we say, you take that with a grain of salt, and you're going to apply it, and you're going to try it, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you're going to try something different. So, not all of these things will work for everybody, but some kind of ways that we can approach the staying cool would be, trying to avoid the unnecessary heat. So, it might be using air conditioning, maybe not going out at the heat of the day if you're going to go take the dog for a walk. One of the things that we often teach patients to do is stay hydrated, thinking about kind of bookending those activities with like a nice cool drink or some frozen grapes or some ice chips. And then after you go out, you would do the same thing. So cold water. One of my favorite tips is to tell people to bring kind of a camelback, like one of those backpacks with the water bladders in them. You can fill those with ice water as you're going along. So you're doing the doing the yard or doing your gardening, kind of sip on that as you go along. Taking cooler showers. I know that's kind of an unpopular recommendation. Another option would be to sit down when you're showering, so it takes a little bit less energy. Using cooling garments. So I've had lots of patients over the years try things like vests that you can put little ice packs into, scarves. There's even neck fans that you can get now, mostly on Amazon, and they kind of go around your neck and blow cool air. So some options that way. And then, being mindful of your clothing choices and, making sure you're not wearing your parka when you don't need to. Like funding. So funding for cooling garments and devices, there is some funding through MS Canada. Their Quality of Life program has an avenue to apply for funding. That's something that Megan and I will often work with patients to sort that out with them. And just I know it's tax season, I think today is the deadline. Air conditioning units can be written off as a medical expense, but you do need a prescription from your doctor. So that is one way that some people will kind of try to get some funding for all these expenses that come with having with a chronic condition. Because of the invisible nature of fatigue, it can be really difficult for others to understand it. We do find in teaching patients to learn to think about fatigue and manage fatigue, that we actually find that the use of analogies really helpful. So some of the ones I'm going to breeze through here, and for any of you who have seen me in the past, I think you've probably heard me talk about these a lot. But if you haven't, some of my favorites are the gas tank. So thinking about the energy that you have is kind of represented in a gas tank. And when you get low, you have to fill up, or else you're going to be like stranded on the side of the road, and that's no good for anybody. Having MS, unfortunately, it does mean that you'll use up that gas tank a little faster. That fuel range won't be quite as long and quite as far. So you have to kind of top up a little bit more often. Then we have the traffic light analogy. I like this one because it's really a good visual, and most people will understand. If I'm in the red, I'm going to stop. If I'm yellow, I'm going to kind of slow down. And if I'm green, I'm good to go. We have the old iPhone analogy for some of our younger people. You might like this one. An older iPhone, it appears as normal. It's like a phone, but it really struggles to maintain that battery power. You have to keep plugging it in because it drains the battery so quickly. Um, just as people with struggling with MS related fatigue, those energy levels are going to deplete faster. You might need to slow down and take more breaks and charge that phone up more frequently. And then, we have the spoon theory, which is actually, I'm going to explain the budget analogy first because to me it makes a bit more sense. But one thing we like to kind of pose the question for people is, imagine that MS gave you $1 a day, and every penny is some kind of activity or energy that you're using for an activity. So each penny has to count for something, right? You're taking a shower, that might be 10 pennies, it might be 25 pennies, depending on the day. And when you're thinking about going throughout your day, where are those pennies being budgeted, and what are you using? How can you reduce some of your expenditure? How do you budget that? How do you make those pennies go as far as possible? Spoon theory, I think a lot of people are very familiar with this one. It comes from the chronic fatigue world, but similar to the energy budget, right? You're using those spoons to represent the energy costs of an activity. I just wanted to go a little bit into this one. So, when we're talking about the traffic light analogy, we're also talking about those zones of fatigue. And this one I find really a powerful tool if you're talking to other people to kind of explain to them how you're feeling and what you might be doing to combat those fatigue symptoms. So in the red zone, I think you're all familiar with that. You're crashing and burning. You're out of energy. You're done. You're overwhelmed. Your brain is foggy. You might be thinking about, hey, okay, I'm stopping. I need to do only what's essential. I might need to delegate. I might need to ask for help. I'm adjusting my plans. People in the yellow zone, they might start to notice those fatigue levels, those fatigue symptoms increasing a little bit. Maybe you're getting more irritable, you're more stressed, you're not thinking as clearly. At that point, it's a sign that you got to yield, you got to slow down. You have to start, hey, maybe I'm going to sit down. I'm going to think about a way to make this task easier. I'm going to reprioritize. Maybe you need to cool down. And then in the green zone, you're feeling ready to tackle the day. You're calm and focused. One thing that we always think about, even if you're in the green zone, you always want to be thinking about, how do I proactively prevent myself from going into that red zone? So, right, the concept of resting before you get tired, pacing yourself, using short, frequent breaks. Those are good things to be doing, even if you're feeling really well. Why is managing fatigue important? I mean, you hear this and I think that it is, but one of the things to think about is that we want to prevent you from being stuck in what we call the boom bust or the push crash cycle. The boom bust cycle is actually very commonly experienced, and it's very common that I see coming through my door. It's kind of makes sense, right? Like if you have a good day and you're like, oh man, I suddenly have all this energy that I need to get 19 things off my to-do list done. You're going to overdo it, and then you could potentially crash down and and need to rest and recover, and spend time recovering from that overexertion, which ultimately means you can get less done. Over the long term, sometimes people who are really constantly stuck in that chronic push boom or boom bust or push crash cycle, actually we see a declining level of function and a decreasing overall level of activity, which means they're not getting to all the things that they should be getting to and need to be getting to in a day. And so really that's sort of the big why as to, why is this important to be a bit conscientious and proactive about managing fatigue levels. On the next slide, I think I drew this on where, so please don't judge my drawing too badly, but really it kind of demonstrates like what is the goal of using these energy maximization strategies that Megan's going to be covering in a second here. We want to prevent you from getting stuck in that boom bust cycle. So instead of pushing yourself to those upper limits and having your activity levels kind of crash back down and doing nothing, we want to see a bit more even of a kind of activity level without those big variations.
All right. So I will start off by just saying that tonight we're only really going to have time to skim the surface on all of these different strategies and themes. I think Liz and I could both talk about these things for hours. But when we're when we're talking about fatigue management, we need to zoom out a little bit and think about things from three different lenses. So One, how can I save little bits of energy in small ways so that they add up to be a significant amount of energy saved? This is called energy conservation. Two, how is the environment or the context contributing to my fatigue levels and how can I manipulate it? And thing number three is how can I maximize how much energy I store? So, how am I expanding my energy reserves? So, we're going to be talking about different energy maximizing strategies, also known as the 6 Ps. So, we're going to go through each of these, but that overall theme is really, being smart with your energy. You need to be smart with what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how you're doing it. So, we will talk about pacing first. So, pacing essentially means to do things over a longer period of time or at a slower pace. Doing tasks more slowly or taking regular breaks can help to stop fatigue from building up. So, how do you pace? Thing number one, and the most important concept with pacing is just anticipate that the fatigue will come. Know it's going to come and schedule a rest break before that fatigue becomes overwhelming. I know that it can be tempting to push through an activity to try to complete it all at once. And let's face it, it's human nature to want to take the break after we've accomplished all the things. But as Liz just mentioned, this can lead to that boom and bust cycle where you're overdoing it and then needing to spend a long time to recover. Now, there's no specific formula for how often you need to rest or for how long it should be. It's going to be different for every person. A good starting point can be to think about times in your day when your fatigue starts to kick in and start by scheduling a break before that time. And it's important to note that we are far more likely to follow through on taking our breaks if we actually plan ahead for them by scheduling them right into our day. And then, of course, start small and build from there. If you are somebody that takes no breaks, start with a 5-minute break. If you are somebody that is taking a 30-minute break, maybe add a second break that's 10 minutes. So, again, start small and build from there. Another way to pace is to break up activities into smaller chunks and adding rest periods between those chunks. So we're actually more energy efficient and time efficient when we pace ourselves instead of waiting until the end to take a break. On the surface, you may think it takes longer because of the added time for those rest periods, but you actually need to think about the recovery time when you're adding up that total time. So, oftentimes, taking that break partway through can leave you feeling less symptomatic than if you were to have pushed through and needed a lot longer to recover after. Spreading activities out over the course of the week rather than trying to, do too many things on 1 or 2 days. Again, that can lead to that boom and bust cycle. So, one example would be, with your household chores. Instead of, on Saturday, cleaning your house top to bottom, doing all the chores, all the management of your house. Instead, a way to kind of pace through that would be, maybe one day you do laundry, the next day you clean the bathrooms, the next day you vacuum upstairs, the next day you vacuum downstairs, et cetera, et cetera. But basically you're spreading out those tasks throughout the week instead of overdoing it in one go. And then another way to pace is by alternating what you're doing. So alternating maybe physically exerting activities with activities that require more brain power and thinking, or even alternating between easier tasks and harder, more energy intensive tasks. So essentially, you're not doing all your hardest things all at once, which again can lead to you overdoing it. So on the next slide, yeah, we have this nice visual representation, um, that really represents that idea of taking a break before the fatigue becomes overwhelming. It'll take less to, recharge your battery if you pause and plug in sooner versus waiting until you are completely drained and depleted. So, a special note about breaks. I want to mention that there are very different types of breaks, and it's really important to actually know what type of break you need in order for it to be effective. The most intuitive, common sense break is a physical break, right? So, a physical break, is taking a break from physical exertion. So, you've been standing, you've been walking, moving your body, carrying things, lifting things. A physical break is, you sit down, you lay down, you pause that physical exertion. Now, a cognitive break is less intuitive, but I think almost even more important to consider. So a cognitive break is the same idea except this time you're giving your brain a break. And so what you do during a cognitive break is very very different. Some examples of a cognitive break might be to go in a quiet private space even just for a moment. So a good I don't know, a good example of a cognitive break is going to the bathroom even if you don't have to go to the bathroom. But it gives you that brief, quiet, private, no visual distractions. It just gives your brain a little bit of a break. Um, Other cognitive breaks could be even doing something physical. So going for a short walk, standing up, stretching, getting up and filling your water bottle. Um, Anything that gives your brain a bit of a break. So the next P is prioritization, which is all about acknowledging that you and any human being actually cannot do everything because you only have so much energy and time. Being smart with your energy means deliberately spending your energy in the places that matter. So, a good way to start out is to actually write a to do list, whether that's a daily to do list, a weekly to do list, a monthly to do list. And then once that list is written out, go through the items and assign a priority level in whatever way makes sense to you. So whether it's a, 1, 2, 3 system where one is top priority, two is, kind of important, but it can wait. Three is bottom of the barrel. Why am I even putting this on my list? Could be like an ABC system, or even if you just highlight or underline those top priority tasks. Doesn't matter how you do it. Um, and on the slide, it can be helpful to ask yourself some of these reflective questions to help guide how you would rank each item on your to do list. So, a good rule of thumb is to have no more than three priorities on your daily to do list. So, no more than three big priorities every day. And I always make sure to talk about the importance of prioritizing yourself. It is extremely, extremely common, and it's a common pitfall to constantly give a lower priority ranking to activities that maybe aren't, quote unquote productive. So, assigning a lower priority ranking to things like doing a hobby or sitting outside with a coffee and a book, or even meeting up and catching up with a friend, things that fill you up as a person. So I encourage you to also remember to prioritize these types of activities because these types of activities can actually help to energize you and help build up those energy levels too. So don't just focus on those, productive tasks. Planning. So, again, a huge component of maximizing your energy is planning, being systematic. So, being smart with your energy is really being smart with when and where you're spending that energy, acknowledging that it is a limited resource. Some really helpful tools that can help you to plan are your to-do list and then using a calendar or a schedule. Some helpful concepts to remember. So, being aware of your own fatigue patterns. So, knowing what times of the day or what times of the week your energy levels tend to be their highest, knowing what times of the day or week they tend to be the lowest, understanding what activities tend to consistently worsen your fatigue. So, having a good understanding of your fatigue patterns can make it so much easier to plan because you know what you need to plan around. Um, Again, that concept, right? Rest before you get tired and actually schedule those breaks right into your calendar. It can also be helpful to schedule in what I like to call buffers, which is essentially unplanned time in your day or week. And what these buffers are helpful for is they give you flexibility on those days that your fatigue is maybe higher and you need to pace more or you need more breaks. You've already accounted for that with these buffers. So on this list again, there's some, or sorry, on this slide, there's some helpful questions that you can ask yourself as you're kind of building, your time and your schedule. Um, so I'm a big fan of the weekly schedule, and this is often one of the first things that I recommend to people. But they are a really fantastic way to plan, and they can also be a really easy and fantastic tool to more deliberately incorporate so many of all of these energy maximization strategies. Because in the end, you end up with a visual representation of where you're spending your time, where you're spending your energy. And it can become very obvious what strategies you may want to tap into more. So, for example, a weekly schedule can show if you are or maybe aren't pacing, how you're spreading your activities out throughout the course of the day or throughout the course of the week, if you're scheduling enough breaks, if you're overdoing it on some days, et cetera, et cetera. So, on the next slide, I have just a couple of examples of what these weekly schedules might look like. The kind that works for you might be very different than another person. So these are just two different examples of what a weekly schedule might look like. So the one on the left, obviously that one's going to be more helpful if you have more like time specific things throughout the course of your week. The one on the right offers a little bit more flexibility. Now, these two examples, they come from a website that I really like. It's called scatteredsquirrel.com. It's a woman that's basically created free templates, name it, and she's got a template to help keep you organized. So I love particularly her weekly calendars. Um, Again, they're free. They come in pretty colors, and there's a whole variety of styles. But the weekly schedule is a really fantastic tool for fatigue management. So positioning is a bit of a broad term that is all about, completing an activity in the most efficient way possible. So maintaining good posture, so it decreases the muscle effort needed to complete an activity, which makes that activity more energy efficient. Good posture also ensures our strongest and most optimal muscles are recruited for breathing. And so, it is important to consider posture because poor posture can contribute to fatigue levels. Next, it's important to consider how your environment is laid out and where you're storing items. So, for example, put commonly used or maybe those heavier items within an easy reaching distance. I typically recommend between that like shoulder and waist level, which minimizes reaching overhead. So anytime we're reaching above shoulder levels, any of those tasks are just inherently fatiguing. And same thing if you're having to bend, stoop, reach kind of below that waist. So again, if you can store, things that you use often, or if they're heavy in that shoulder to waist range, they'll be more energy efficient to grab and move and manipulate. Beyond kind of that physical setup of your environment, it's also important to consider how the environment is contributing to what I call the cognitive load. So, your brain needs to spend so much extra energy to filter out background distractions. So, think, background noise, TV, music, uh, busier, louder, cluttered, or visually stimulating environments. Your brain spends so much more energy to be able to focus in on what's meaningful. So, by simplifying your environment. So maybe eliminating some background distractions, um, or if you don't have that ability to, turn off the music or the TV, maybe considering earplugs out in public, um, or even adding a bit of organization. These things can go a long way to saving that cognitive energy. Uh, Tools can make a job a lot easier, which means that you're saving energy. So, a few examples are things like food processors, electric can openers, carts to move items around your kitchen, or even a basket to carry up items up and down the stairs. Um, Also, tools or basically any item that you hold in your hands, you use less energy to hold on to these things if the handles are, thicker, chunkier, or are more lightweight. So kind of considering what your frequently grabbed tools are. So, like spatula, kitchen utensils, things like that. And then lastly, around positioning is, reflecting on, do you have opportunity to push or slide, especially heavier items, instead of lifting and carrying them? So one example is, the heavy pot of water that you're going to be boiling for dinner. Can you slide it across the counter from the sink instead of lifting and carrying? Another example is at the grocery store. Even if it's a small trip, don't carry the basket, just go for the cart. You're going to save a lot of energy. Our next P is problem solving, which is another really big component of energy maximization. This is sometimes called activity analysis. And essentially, what this means is reflecting on activities that tend to leave you fatigued and think about opportunities to make small changes that could make that activity more energy efficient. Step number one is to identify what task do you need to pick apart? A common one that comes up all the time might be grocery shopping, cooking dinner, showering, whatever that activity is for you. This is a good exercise to go through. So, just a few reflective questions to kind of get you thinking. So like, what is the activity? What are the steps? Are there opportunities to simplify some steps, combine steps, delegate steps, eliminate steps? Why does it need to be done? Is it important? Why is it on my list? Am I the best person to do the job? Can someone else do the job or even share part of it? When should it be done? So thinking about not just, time of the day and time of the week, but also what are you doing before that activity? What are you doing after? Um, Thinking about where is that activity being done? So considering things like lighting, positioning, seating, are you reaching above your shoulders? What is the environment like? A quick and dirty tip for saving a lot of physical energy is to sit instead of stand, and to kind of think about, can I sneak in sitting in creative ways? Like, could I bring could I bring a stool over to the counter to chop my vegetables or, stir my recipe at the stove? Could I sit in the shower with a shower stool? So, can I sneak in sitting to save energy? And then again, how is that activity being done? Thinking about pacing, breaks, etc. So, it's possible that for some of these activities you're reflecting on, it can be helpful to think about, can you delegate? Can you ask for help? Or can you even hire for certain services? So there's a little bit of a list to get you started on the right hand side, if you are thinking that it could be helpful. To hire out services or seek services to, again, eliminate some of the energy that you're spending. Okay, so the last P, which is honestly often the hardest, giving yourself permission to use these strategies that we've been talking about. So, a lot of what we talk about involves making changes, often to the way you've done things your whole life. And that's not easy for anyone. So, again, like start small and slowly build, um, and give yourself that grace as you make changes and, give yourself that permission to ultimately prioritize your needs. Give yourself permission to ask for help, rest, honor what your brain and body are telling you. And sometimes adjusting expectations and setting boundaries and limits so that you actually have enough energy for the things you need to do, want to do, the things you want to say yes to. So, shifting gears a little bit, so some other important considerations beyond the 6 Ps. So, thing number one is cognitive fatigue. So, it deserves its own slide because I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for how much energy we use just using our thinking skills. But as Liz mentioned earlier, cognitive fatigue is extremely common in MS. Again, it can often be described as brain fog. But what it can do is it can make things, daily tasks that require thinking, it can make them difficult. So it can make things like, can make it hard to do things like read, follow a conversation, keep up in a conversation, remember what you were going to do, follow a recipe that's complex, focus on a task, make decisions, problem solve, or even, having the word on the tip of your tongue, but not being able to find that right word. So these are some of the ways that cognitive fatigue can show up. So on the next slide, and I know that these slides are going to be sent out, but these are a few different tips for specifically dealing with cognitive fatigue. So I'll just kind of skim over them for time's sake, but multitasking is a myth. Our brains can't multitask. Really, what we do is we rapidly shift between multiple tasks, but it's way more energy efficient to just focus on one thing at a time. There are so many tools out there to save cognitive energy, and we talked about a lot of them actually in the 6 Ps. So things like to-do lists, schedules, alarms, reminders. All of these things can make your brain work more efficiently. So you're spending less energy spinning your wheels trying to manage all the stuff in your brain. Um, Cognitive breaks are important. Giving yourself extra time. Thinking about, if you have jobs on your list that require bigger levels of, concentration or focus, plan to do those types of activities during a time of day that you have a bit more energy. Break down those larger, overwhelming tasks into smaller, more manageable components, and also rely on routine and structure to help decrease that cognitive load.
Okay, I have been seeing a few questions about exercise come through the chat, and rightly so, because so often we see people get stuck in this really vicious cycle of high levels of fatigue, and then you're less active, you're a bit more sedentary. Potentially, that's leading to some deconditioning, that kind of loss of flexibility, strength, etc., which then contributes to higher fatigue levels. So while while it may seem counterintuitive, actually maintaining certain levels of physical activity can actually help you manage that primary MS fatigue to a better degree. The benefits, I mean, I'm not going to go through the benefits of exercise because they're vast and they're huge, but it is good for many reasons, not just fatigue management. Everything from improved muscle strength, improved sleep, improved mood, and all that kind of good stuff. Some of the myths, so even as late as 20, or as recently as 20 years ago, people with MS were actually advised to not exercise. It was thought that it would permanently worsen your condition, and thankfully research has pointed us in the other direction at this point. There is no strong evidence that exercise would cause a permanent worsening of symptoms. However, it can trigger some temporary symptoms, right? Like whether that's weakness or sensory changes. So it is important to exercise. Know that it's not going to cause permanent damage. But one of the guidance that our physical therapists will give in clinic is that as long as you're kind of recovering within that 30 minutes to 2 hour time period, then you've pushed an appropriate amount. some of the things we often hear people tell us is, well, if I'm not exercising, like no pain, no gain. If I'm not going 10 out of 10, it's not worth it. I got to go hard or go home. That may not be the case when you're trying to incorporate an exercise, some exercise into your daily routines. It's just some ways to think about exercise. Exercise may not necessarily look like going to the gym, right? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes our general physical activities in our day will be counting as our exercise. So gardening, doing your laundry, doing your house chores, walking the dog. Sometimes we're going to see more, more other leisure activities like going to the pool for a swim or going hiking or, meeting a friend. That might also be, being counting as some of your exercise. There is also a lot of our patients at both of the clinics will connect through MS Canada actually to look at what are some of the offerings for either virtual, most of our virtual programs, as my understanding now. But working with MS Canada, they can connect you with a few different programs. One is NeuroSAS, which is a virtual program run through the University of Saskatchewan. I've had lots of patients say really good things about it. Same with Time Together. I think it's Together in Movement, and anyway, I can't remember what it exactly stands for. But again, an online virtual program, and focusing on kind of balance and seated exercises and things. So those are two virtual options if you're like, I need a little nudge in the right direction. There is also quite a few really good videos. I want to shout out to Can Do MS. It's an online site. And they actually have a whole wealth of videos ranging from really simple chair exercises to more complex ones. So definitely take a look at that if you haven't before. So exercise and fatigue. This is always a really big topic in our clinic. How do you manage fatigue and get some exercise in? We're going to apply the same concepts that Megan was talking about. So your planning and your pacing. Some major points to think about is you want to be thinking about exercising at the time of day when you have the most energy to do so. Maybe that's after a nap, maybe that's first thing in the morning. You want to also consider intervals, and I'm not talking like high intensity interval training. I'm talking more, can you break up those workout sessions into maybe 10-minute chunks, right? So you're not maybe doing 30 minutes at a time, maybe you're doing a few shorter sessions. Start small. Something is better than nothing. You don't have to go out and run a marathon. You know what? If walking around the block is where you're at, that's okay. That's still exercise. It's going to help. Thinking about how can I modify these exercises? Do I need to get in touch with a physical therapist about modifying that, or an exercise therapist? That's something to think about. And then obviously you're going to get sick of us saying this, but taking those rest breaks, super important, super helpful. And then being flexible, right? You don't, maybe your plan was to go do one part of an exercise and then it's not going to work. Then, you might want to stop and change your plans a little bit. All right. And sleep, preaching to the, we know that poor sleep can impact your energy levels. So the quantity and quality of sleep that you're getting could be impacting your fatigue levels on any given day or any given week. If that's the case, you're going to want to go back to some of the basics and say, okay, how can I optimize my sleep? Things like getting up at the same time each day, going to bed at the same time each day, getting that early morning sunlight to keep that circadian rhythm going, having a bit of a wind down routine at night, having that bedtime routine in place, not watching the clock, which is something that I think a lot of us are guilty of. Those are some ways to look at sleep and kind of optimizing that, what we call that sleep hygiene. Okay, and I recognize that we are getting close to our time, but I just wanted to quickly talk about the Optimus program. Optimus stands for Outpatient Treatment in Multiple Sclerosis. We are based out of the Foothills Medical Center. Our program mandate is that we are a short-term intervention focused on really trying to empower people living with MS to maximize your functional abilities, increase your sense of self-efficacy in order to ultimately, hopefully, better manage living with MS. We're a team of occupational therapy, we have physical therapy, a nurse, a social worker, and we usually have a counselor, although right now those psychologists are few and far between in the old Alberta Health Services system. So right now we're actually running without our counselor, but we're doing our very best. We offer phone, virtual, and in-person sessions. I find people with fatigue, it's a lot of work to come to the foothills sometimes and find the parking and get to where you need to go. So we do a lot of our work virtually and by phone. To get to us, you would talk to the neurologist or the nurse at the Foothills MS Clinic. Our and patients of Foothills Medical Clinic MS Clinic can also contact us directly to discuss a referral. Usually, that's our repeat customers are contacting us. But yeah, that's a really brief intro to the Optimist program.
So at South Campus, we have a very similar service, just a mildly different model, but we do have a full kind of multidisciplinary team with occupational therapy, physiotherapy, social work. We have a registered dietitian, speech and language pathologist, psychology, and neuropsychology. Again, we are kind of a goal oriented rehabilitation team, and we are here to support your needs, your goals, so that you can do the things you need to do and want to do, and best manage your symptoms. Um, Referrals to us, how do you get connected? Just chat with your clinic. So call your nurse, or if you have your appointment with your neurologist or one of the physicians, just mention who you want to see, what your concerns are, and that will initiate everything. So we have a lot of different options for fatigue management. So at South Health Campus, myself and the other OT in the clinic, we offer what we call Introduction to MS Fatigue. So it's kind of like a crash course. It's what we talked about today, but we go into a little bit more detail. We run it virtually over Zoom, and we offer that once a month. I'll let Liz talk about the more intensive fatigue group that her team runs.
Yeah, and so we at Optus we run a longer group session. It's a 6-week session, usually about 2 hours each session, run virtually, and it's actually facilitated not just by OT, but actually our whole staff will present. Yeah, and we just go into it's the same information that Megan would cover at Introduction to MS Fatigue, but it's a little bit slower pace. We do, I think, a little bit more kind of discussion, and one of the things that patients love about it is that they hear from other patients, and kind of that group learning is really powerful. And I think that validation too. So that's one of the things that we do at Optimus, and obviously we would see patients from both Health and Optimus for that.
So there's also a class that myself and our dietitian run. It's called Cooking When Fatigued. So this was our brainchild back in 2012, I want to say, when we realized that we had so many people mention to us that cooking dinners and eating the way that they wanted to was extremely difficult because of fatigue. And so we have access to this beautiful kitchen at the hospital here, and we do a cooking class, and it's super fun. So we offer it either virtually or in person, where we teach some of these concepts around fatigue management and meal preparation and meal planning. And if you come in person, you get to actually eat the food. So it's super fun. Um, at South Health Campus as well, we run a program called Brain Boost. So this is not specific to MS, but rather anybody kind of experiencing some of those memory concerns. So right now we're only offering it a couple times a year, but that might expand down the road. But it's essentially um, we learn all about strategies and lifestyle choices to manage memory concerns. Spoiler alert, we talk a lot about cognitive fatigue. Um, of course, one-on-one with occupational therapy at either sites. And then we also have a slide with a lot of really high quality, outstanding resources, ways you can kind of learn on your own through webinars or resources. So you'll have access to those once these slides get sent out. And here they are.
So thank you everyone for being here. And thank you very much to our incredible speakers. I learned a ton, so I'm hoping everyone else did too.